so that my half-brother, the golden kid, could move in. My dad booted me out. Yet here we are, 6 months later, pleading with me to fabricate evidence to exonerate him from his crime. As a guy, I turned 18 around 4 months ago, and 6 months ago, my dad forbade me from living here because my jerk half-brother Derek, who is 24 years old, decided he wanted to move back in and live with my dad instead of renting a home like a regular person. Derek is the kid of my dad's first marriage, just so you know. Unfortunately, my dad and Derek's mom split up shortly after he was born, so they never had a chance to get to know one another. Growing up, we spent a lot of time together, as Derek is closer to my dad than his mother. He would visit us more frequently than was legally necessary under his custody agreement, which allowed us to spend a lot of time together. Although I despised spending time with him, my dad insisted that we spend half a month together, so I think I'm imagining things too clearly when I say that he was meant to spend half a month with my dad. His dislike of me and perception of me as a danger to him are both things I know to be true. Things between my dad and me began to decline after my mother's death a few years ago, following a protracted struggle with lung cancer. Please understand that my relationship with my dad has been strained ever since I was a little child. I suppose my dad wasn't hoping for a child with my personality. Or perhaps he had no interest in having a child at all. It seemed like he didn't want me around very much when I was a kid because of the strange way he handled me. Even for the tiniest things, he would become enraged and shout at me. He was uncaring and unsupportive at all times, and no amount of effort on my part could ever warm his heart. When he was with Derek, though, he changed completely. Whenever Derek was in the house, he would transform into the most amazing dad ever and accomplish all of my requests. Even though we had already made it plain that we didn't get along, he insisted that we spend time together nevertheless. I disliked Derek because he bullied me as a child, and he disliked me because I posed a threat to him. It seemed like he was always up for nothing more than picking fights with me and bossing me about whenever he could. Because my father would never speak out against him, he was also certain that he could get away with it. If I ever went to my dad to complain about how harsh Derek was with me, he'd tell me to just take it because, allegedly, that's how guys are meant to play, and he didn't want me to be a wimp as an adult. I was under the impression that my father wanted me to do it. Consequently, I figured out how to swallow my pride and let it all play out. Because I was afraid my dad would become furious if I retaliated, and because I knew that getting into a fight with Derek would just make him shout at me, I would never do it. In every argument with Derek, I would end up on the losing end, regardless of whether he was intentionally hurting me or not. In my dad's eyes, I was always the villain no matter what occurred. I should have known better than to assume that he had a favorite among us. Despite the fact that I was 6 years his junior, he never once thought it strange that Derek was picking on me. Then, when physical violence wasn't getting the job done, he gradually began to resort to other forms of bullying. At the same time, he was maturing, so when he entered high school, he began to torment me with his classmates. School had previously served as a sanctuary for me, as I was still in elementary school throughout his middle school years, and we were in separate buildings, making it impossible for him to reach me there. The problem was that we shared a building when I began middle school, and he and his cronies picked on me relentlessly. Even the seniors knew that I was Derek's naive little younger brother, and they would circulate malicious tales about me, claiming that I had some sort of mental disability. They really did use that term to describe me. I'm not exaggerating. When I was in middle school, I saw that kids started to care more about their reputation. Thus, it was hard for me when they would insult me. I was no longer cool enough to hang out with anyone. Even my primary school classmates wouldn't talk to me. After Derek left, I was finally able to have the school all to myself. Even though I had a few friends, I was too worn out from always fighting to even bear disputing with others, so I would let them get away with it. Most people simply believed them. Derek and my dad would never miss a chance to make me feel like a complete moron, so circumstances at home were no better. The most amusing aspect was that I was far from being a complete moron. My father and Derek didn't value my good grades or my proficiency in science and other subjects. Derek was an outstanding football player and, to top it all off, a good student. You may probably put yourself in my shoes and try to comprehend how terrible things were at home. Derek was the ideal kid for my dad. He was athletic, smart, and everything I was not. Conversely, there was myself, who exemplified the stereotypical average citizen. My insignificance and mediocrity were constantly brought to my attention by them. My mom would often try to defend me, but my dad was such a good talker that he could persuade her that they were only being playful and that what they said had no real meaning. Despite her typically pleasant personality, my mother's undying love for my father clouded her judgment and prevented her from seeing him for who he really was. I was grateful that she would do her utmost to protect me, but her efforts were ultimately fruitless. Reason being, my father and Derek persisted in bullying me for an indefinite period of time since it wasn't sufficient. After much waiting, Derek left for college. And I finally felt relief. Even without the other jerk, my dad would still be around, but he was much easier to deal with. My mom was diagnosed with lung cancer before I could experience life at home without Derek bullying me all the time. We felt like our entire world had crumbled. Therefore, it was really hard for us to accept it. Our deep affection for our mother was the one and only bond between my father and myself. My dad chose to make the most of a bad situation, despite the fact that her diagnosis devastated us both. Already, my mom was in pain. However, he began to emotionally distance himself from her even farther, contradicting what my father and I had been doing. Prior to my mom's sickness, he would only address me while making fun of me, but now he acts as if I don't exist and would not even acknowledge my existence. Both of us were going through hell, and he simply chose a different method to handle it, so I'll give him a pass. Obviously, my mom's situation was not supposed to bring us closer together, as much as I would have liked it to. My father despised me and couldn't stand the idea of me being happy, so even if it had been predestined, he would have made sure it didn't happen. My mom's health deteriorated worse over time, and I began to feel the effects of my dad's rage as well. Reason being, he would either completely disregard me and not communicate with me at all, or he would be extremely disrespectful to me to the point that I was on the verge of tears on several occasions. I did my best to maintain family harmony by avoiding answering my father's questions. I knew doing so would only serve to embolden him in his belittling and picking on of me. During the years that my mother was ill, I was grateful that Derek would ignore me whenever he returned from college. Even though he wouldn't treat me nicely, the fact that he's human is more than enough for me. It was terrible enough when my mother was alive, but things really took a turn for the worse when she died. After my mother passed away, we were very quiet at home for a few months. In other words, I would be the one to perform all the labor while my dad remained completely uncommunicative. Everything would go well for him. He'd get up, go to work, and then return home to eat supper and whatnot. I called my grandparents many times to express my fear that my father could be suffering from depression. Nevertheless, they failed to take my concerns seriously. Their lack of concern for their son to inquire about his well-being following the burial suggests a lack of concern for him as a person, or they just disliked me, like my father, and were unwilling to comply with my requests. However, my dad began acting more like himself after a few months. Regrettably, it also involved indulging in excessive drinking and causing me to feel terrible about myself once more. In addition to going to school, I was also expected to perform all the housework that my mother used to do, which was rather exhausting due to his continual orders. All the work would still be done with my dad's help, even while Mom was sick, but now that she's gone, it's all on me. I didn't dare say anything since my dad would have told me I wasn't making enough money to pay the bills, so I figured this was the least I could do. Even though it was incredibly hurtful, I had no choice but to swallow my pride and endure it for what felt like an eternity. College was the one thing I was looking forward to, as it would finally allow me to escape my father and avoid returning home. After my mom left, I stopped seeing this house as home. Therefore, I stopped even considering it as such. I could have stayed with my mom's parents when she passed away, but they live quite a distance away, and I just had a year of school left, so that wasn't an option. My father booted me out of the house a few months ago even though he knew I was returning home. As a result, I went to live with my grandparents. It had been a few years since Derek had left for college, but he never came back to live here. He took a job there after finishing college and opted to remain since his fiancée wanted to start a new life away from home. Derek ultimately opted to remain there with her, returning only on rare occasions for the holidays. He tied the knot with his fiancée around 2 years ago when she became pregnant. It felt like the best time to acquire hot, as they had recently graduated when they found out. Unexpectedly, I was asked to attend the wedding only because of it. He stopped frightening me one day. Even though she was sick, my mom was also there. For the simple reason that everyone adored my mom, regardless of his disapproval. Plus, his mother was not the best parent, so he didn't have a strong relationship with her. I say this because she exemplified the type of mother who disregarded her child and failed to foster any form of bond with her. It seemed to me that the woman's lifelong objective was to amass wealth, and she was already married 4 times when Derek tied the knot. I have no doubt that she worked and paid for herself. However, her bond with her kid suffered as a result. That clarifies, I suppose, why Derek had such a strong bond with our dad. Unfortunately, he was only ever really cared for by one parent, and he had no interest in sharing that parent with me. By any measure, Dad got hitched, and not long after that, he expanded his family. For some reason, they chose to return 6 months ago after having lived there contentedly for the previous 2 years. I'm not sure why. In the week or so leading up to Derek's return, my dad finally told me about it. Also, Dad took great pride in it. He once sat me down and told me I had to find housing immediately since Derek was returning home and I would have to vacate my room. I inquired as to why they couldn't simply utilize the guest room, given that we had 3 bedrooms. He then informed me that Derek and his wife would be residing in the guest room, with my chamber serving as their nursery. Since I was going to be an adult in a matter of months, it was evidently crucial that I go from the house because I was already sufficient. When my dad insisted that I vacate the premises, I felt he was being extremely self-centered and unneeded. The simple reason being that he desired to reunite with his family here. My father had already decided, so there was no sense in trying to argue with him. He gave me 2 weeks to pack up and leave, and then he threatened to call the police if I remained. Looking back, I see that there must have been a legal way to stop him, but I was too scared to think about it at the time. I didn't trust my dad, and I knew he could kick me out at any moment. I then began to hastily seek my own living quarters, but in the end, I decided to move in with my grandparents. Since they lived so far away and I still had to go to school, I had avoided doing that up until that point. However, I was prepared to take that chance because I didn't have any other alternatives, and there were only a few weeks left of high school anyhow. Since I was not present when Derek returned home with his wife and child, I had already left within a few days. The day I packed up and left with the movers, my father didn't even bother to say goodbye, so it was clear he didn't care that I moved out. I begged my grandparents to hold back from picking me up in their pickup because the drama would have been too much. They were about to rip into my dad. Since then, I've been staying with my grandparents for the past 6 months. From the moment he expelled me, I avoided communicating with my father and had no intention of changing that. That was meant to be taken care of already, as I was due to start college in a few weeks. My dad and Derek were the ones who had to contact me because something had occurred, and now they needed my help. Even though I had absolutely no desire to talk to them again. I was taken aback when they paid me a visit a few days ago. I never anticipated that they would get in touch with me. Their need prompted me to strike up a discussion with them, and my grandparents continued to let them in. I learned that Derek and his family had returned here because he had lost his job and was having trouble paying rent. It was a tough decision, but he evidently had to make it. Since his wife preferred to remain at home with their child and not go out and work until she felt ready, he had no problem with it. They returned anticipating an easy job search, but that was not the case. At this time, absolutely no local businesses were recruiting. Plus, Derek wasn't really a standout prospect because people with his skill set were so numerous. But my dad got him a job at the firm where he now works. Neither of them was thrilled about it because Derek's salary was slightly lower than before, but they had to make do with what they had. However, it became apparent a few weeks ago that Derek had been embezzling funds from the business for a couple of months prior. Their employers accuse them of working together and are taking legal action against my dad and Derek as a result. In the event that they do not promptly reimburse the funds. The fact that it's a family business and the CEO was formerly close friends with my mom is the sole explanation why they haven't been sued yet. I have been asked by my father and Derek to assist them, and the only reason he hasn't sued them for embezzlement yet is out of respect for her. However, he will not wait much longer. They insisted I say that they had been stealing from me for my education fund and that it wasn't for their own benefit. As a result, my dad thought he could be more lenient with us and give them more time to repay the money. Even if they were fired, at least they wouldn't go to jail over it. They wanted me to be the scapegoat and save the day, so they could use me. Their outrageous behavior toward me their whole lives made me wonder how they could muster the gall to ask me anything so daring. It was such a wild notion that I was certain it would fail, so I quickly and without thinking said no. Their scheme was so absurd that I had no interest in participating in it. They became quite angry when I refused to participate in their plot and insisted that I save them from possible jail time because I couldn't let a small grudge from our past destroy their life. I assured them that it wasn't some old grudge or something trivial. It was just about a year ago when my father forcibly removed me from the house, so I would consider it to be rather recent. I still didn't want to lend them a hand for reasons other than that. I knew the man my dad worked for, and I simply felt their strategy was really deceitful. I mentioned before that he was quite friendly with my mom, and he also appeared to enjoy me. Since they had spent so much time together as children, I would call him my uncle whenever he visited while my mom was alive. We got along well enough to have a pleasant chat even at her burial. It was really my mom who advised him to hire my dad when he was down and out at his business. However, rather than expressing gratitude, Derek chose to embarrass these individuals, and my dad was now attempting to conceal everything by utilizing me as a shield. It seemed so low to me that I couldn't bring myself to be involved. I advised them to stop attempting to cover up their theft and pay up the money they had taken rather than spreading further falsehoods. They risked going to jail if they attempted to deceive him again, and I was never going to take their side in this. Actually, they ought to have been appreciative of the opportunity to settle the debt and end the matter without bringing a case that they were very certain to lose and which would severely limit their future prospects due to the high likelihood of jail time. Their current situation is so simple, and they have no clue how much more difficult things may get if they follow through with their insane plan. My dad became very angry when I attempted to explain it to them. He wasn't here to hear me preach, he said, and if I really wanted to be of service to them, I would have agreed to their plan rather than offered them meaningless advice. To my astonishment, my dad genuinely began to cry when I informed him I was pulling out of the situation. This was very out of the ordinary for me, and it made me feel uneasy. I was his son, he informed me, and no matter what had transpired in the past, he would have bailed me out if I had been in this kind of predicament. So, he had been depending on me. Given the gravity of the situation and his strong desire to avoid incarceration, he stated that he anticipated the same from me. Knowing that I was okay, Derek was pleading with me to assist them, and I could see he felt the same way. It was fun for me, and I was the only one who could help my mom's friends out. Without my mom, this would have been a lot less of a headache, but they were relying on me to handle it in her absence. I attempted to persuade them to just be honest and pay back the money they owed, but I had to tell them no nevertheless. Their anger was palpable as they accused me of taking advantage of them, claiming that my past mistreatment of them as a child had left them deeply dissatisfied with my current behavior. After that, they departed, but ever since then, I can't stop picturing them inside bars, and something about it doesn't feel right, and the guilt is gnawing at me. However, I also do not wish to participate in an activity that is both unlawful and morally reprehensible. In addition to being disrespectful to my mother, it would be manipulative to utilize her relationship for my own benefit. It's not like my dad and Derek have an eternity to pay off their obligations. Time is of the essence right now, and I'm genuinely confused about what to do. Because I refuse to lie to protect my father and half-brother, who tormented me throughout my childhood, I put off telling my story. First update. I've decided not to assist them out, and I'm going to stick to it. It is unlawful as well as morally and ethically repugnant. My dad and Derek will have to figure this out independently if they wish to avoid jail time, I refuse to be involved in something like this. They have a chance to put things right, recover the money that Derek took, and escape this mess unscathed. There's no pressing need for them to do so. They have the option to refund the entire amount and take care of this on their own. Consequently, I should not feel bad about it. I was advised to keep away from this by the majority of the commenters. Not only were my father and Derek disgusting people, but what they were doing was truly horrific, and I couldn't bear to live with the guilt and shame that they could. I would prefer not to engage in such behavior, as it is evident that we are clearly not compatible. Because of this, I have decided to keep away from it and will block them if they try to contact me again. Just to clarify, they are already blacklisted globally. I have no doubt, though, that they may try contacting me through a new number or social media account. Since my grandparents are the ones who created this situation, they see my decision to keep out of it as the correct one. Given how they treated me for an extended period of time, it is unreasonable to expect anything from me. Hello. Second update. As I had anticipated, my father contacted me today via text message. 8 days have passed since his previous visit, and we still haven't had any communication. Just as I mentioned before, he called me from a number I wouldn't know, and I also took the call absent-mindedly. I immediately hung up the phone as soon as I heard my dad's voice on the other end of the line. However, I was a little sluggish in blocking him, which allowed him to contact me, and I also received his message. His employer was constantly pressuring him and Derek to return the money or face legal action from their employer, so he messaged me to let me know that he understood I didn't want to go into this any further. He really needed my help. Despite my overwhelming remorse, I responded to his text by telling him I would not be assisting him and that he needed to stop avoiding the issue and find other means to repay the money. Then I decided to block him, and I'm crossing my fingers that he gets it. My goal is that he acts morally regardless of his lack of comprehension. It breaks my heart to think about my dad behind bars. Third update. Though my dad still hasn't gotten back to me, I know he's thinking about something since my grandparents informed me they contacted my mom's buddy, the CEO. Because he's busy and we didn't want to bother him, we haven't called him before. However, we wanted to know what was going on, and neither my father nor Derek could tell us any more. After my grandfather spoke with him, he informed us that he would still go through with the lawsuit in the event that he did not receive the money back within a few months. Since he was friendly with my mom, he said he was ready to let it go, but he still couldn't forgive the debt. I must admit, I held that in high regard. In comparison to how most people would have handled the same issue, he was being extremely forgiving. He went so far as to express his regret that this was happening to me. However, I reassured him that it was of little consequence because I no longer reside with my father and that he was somewhat to blame. The future is uncertain, but I have faith in my dad's intelligence to realize that he needs to find a way to repay the money so he may avoid incarceration. It will take some time, but I'm confident they will complete it, so I won't be worried. Plus, I had a lengthy conversation with my mom's buddy, who informed me that my mom had promised him before she died that his door would be open at any time if I ever needed an internship to get some fast cash or even a job in general. Thank you for the information. I will definitely keep that in consideration moving ahead. It brings me great joy to know that my mom is still watching out for me, even after she's gone.